Welcome back to The Hardline. I'm Rick Blackwell. You know, it's the one thing Republicans and Democrats can agree on when it comes to our policy of fighting Islamic terrorists. Arab nations need to do more to fight terrorism. So the formation of the Islamic Military Alliance should be welcome news by the White House and Republican leaders. Here to discuss this new coalition is the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and author of The Battle for the Soul of Islam, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. And Dr. Jasser, the 34 nations make up this coalition. Are they ready to take the fight to the terrorists?
Well, Rick, thanks for having me. And I hate to tell people I told you so, but we were telling people for years, don't trust the Saudis. Don't trust these dictatorships that really don't have our interests at heart, and especially in the battle against ISIS. I mean, if you look at what created it, aside from the toxic genocidal behavior of the Syrian government, the ideology was fueled by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So ISIS's behavior is no different than the Saudis. So for us to rely on them to lead a coalition, it turns out today there's reports that they released a announcement about the people that were the governments that were part of this, and the Pakistanis and others are saying, hold on a second, we didn't say we were part of any coalition. And they said, we're not necessarily against it, but you can't start saying that you're leading a coalition that hasn't even been formed. So it turns out, as is typical, the Saudi announcements and behavior is all window dressing for a reality that is extremely passive-aggressive when you get down to the details.
Yeah, certainly a PR blunder there. Okay, if this group is not the answer, then what needs to be done to get the governments and the people inside countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey to fight this battle against radical Islamists?
Well, the issue is a short-term one and a long-term. Short-term one is to decimate ISIS. It grew in Iraq because the Iraqi military just sort of let it happen, not to mention some old Baathists that ended up joining ISIS. So we need to, unfortunately, get back to the reality that our vacuum that we left in Iraq is going to need some troops on the ground to do the intelligence to know what's happening there and push them back into Syria. And then on the ground in Syria is going to be much more difficult in that we can't trust the regime there. So ultimately, it's going to need much more activity as far as our sorties is concerned. And also they're engaging a more broader coalition of airstrikes. We already see France doing many more airstrikes than we've done, but still doing some special force operations on the ground in order to figure it out. But that's short term. Long term, you know, listen, we're going to need a strategy. I was very disappointed in the debates just a few nights ago where we didn't hear any vision as far as what is happening post-Arab awakening in the Middle East, and we have to revisit who we thought our allies were. I'm hearing a lot of the old paradigms about how having the dictators work with us against terrorism, and we're forgetting the fact that these dictators really create the ideas and fuel the ideas that radicalize these communities. So we need to start looking at the Arab awakening. While it may be producing radical Islamists, it also has on the ground our natural allies, which are those that want freedom and democracy.
Dr. Jasser, we often hear this concept of moderate Muslims need to take the fight to the radicalized elements of their religion. The average moderate Muslim on the streets in some of these Middle Eastern countries, where are they right now with this fight? Are they dedicated to eradicating radical Islam?
They are chaotic, fractionated, and that's why we've done this Muslim reform movement that's trying to get them to coalesce around a 2-page document we call the Declaration of the Muslim Reform Movement that says we're for secular governance, we're for human rights, universal human rights, and we're for security against and condemning violent jihad, califism, and all Islamic states. But unfortunately, with America missing in the war of ideas happening across media in the Middle East, with the Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter revolutions that happened, it created a vacuum, and civil society has not stepped up to fill that vacuum from the West perspective. And unfortunately, the Irans, the Russias, the Assad regimes of the world have filled in that vacuum with sort of more of the same radicalization that has existed in the past 60 years of dictatorship. So we need a program like we had in the Cold War, where we had a U.S. information agency and a large program of Radio Free Europe, etc. We need Radio Free Islam and others. We don't need troops, because on the ground you have revolutions happening, but it's just complete chaos right now.
So in the final 30 seconds, if you were to give advice to some of the presidential candidates, what do they need to show leadership in this region?
We just wrote a piece in the National Review that lays out a strategy for victory against Islamism. Name the enemy as political Islam, the evil empire as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and our allies as the Muslims that believe in freedom and liberty, that are in the prisons, that are prisoners of conscience, and non-Muslims, minorities, to join as warriors for freedom against the two evils of secular Arab fascism and political Islam, or the Islamist movements.
Once again, it seems to be a common theme, Republicans and Democrats, that the Arab nations need to take the lead in this fight against radical Islam. And Dr. Jasser, thank you so much for all your comments and your insight on a very difficult topic. We appreciate it. And up next, incoming Newsmax host Dennis Michael Lynch joins us for the political animal. As you can imagine, there is a lot to discuss.